It seems that ever since his debut in the Phantom Menace or Star Wars Episode 1, Darth Maul has become an enduringly popular and represented face within the franchise, with the new Maul Shadow Lord series on the horizon once more storing hype for the character. But to be honest, I'm not exactly sure why. There are a lot of different reasons as to why one could find Darth Maul to be an enjoyable character. His design is instantly recognizable, standing out even in a franchise that already features several iconic designs in its own right. His dual-bladed saber, reminiscent of a weapon once wielded by the powerful ancient Sith Exar Kun, has an undeniable swagger, paired with its practical use that allows him to duel multiple opponents at once. Some tend to overrate Maul, not only in terms of his power against those likewise considered strong in the Force, but in terms of his character as well. Before we begin though, I'd like to establish that for our discussion today, we'll solely be covering knowledge provided through the robust chronicles of Star Wars Legends, meaning information released before April of 2014. This will likely be the case for any Star Wars content that I may continue to make in the future, considering the sheer volume of information and content that makes up the Legends continuity, paired with how it appears to be what's largely preferred when engaging with these sorts of discussions as opposed to canon. I'd also appreciate if you could leave a like on the video or subscribe to the channel, as I make content akin to this all the time, and those are good ways to let me know what my existing audience or newcomers want to see from me in the future. Right from the outset and unwanted from the minute he was born, the infant Zabrak was initially given away to Darth Sidious on the planet Dathomir, where he was accepted on the basis of being strong in the Force, promising servitude of a different sort than how one of his circumstances would traditionally serve a night sister as a warrior and slave. Dubbed Maul, befitting the power divined in him, he would grow to be a wrathful young man, seeking vengeance against the Jedi upon dedicating himself to the Sith and heeding his master's teachings of the Republic and their crimes against his order. Through this, Maul would become quite the asset for Sidious and his master, Darth Plagueis. This was not without its caveats, however, as Maul was trained to serve as a powerful assassin while being forbidden from learning the most intimate secrets and powers of the Sith Order. This training eventually culminates in the ultimate reveal that the Sith have indeed been alive and well, operating in the shadows for a millennium, and in what is likely Maul's greatest on-screen achievement, his defeat of prestigious Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn. However, this in and of itself has important context to examine further. On the surface and given the circumstances of Qui-Gon's death, it would appear that Maul is in fact stronger than the Jedi Master. However, the statements pertaining to these two separate duels offer a different perspective. Not only is Qui-Gon declared to in fact be off guard when Maul first attempts to strike against the Jedi following their discovery of Anakin on Tatooine, but something else to take into consideration is that none of the Jedi have actually fought against a Sith in close to 1,000 years. This is following the Battle of Ruusan and Darth Bane's establishment of the Rule of Two, which is something we'll go more in depth about in a bit. But for now, this results in both Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan having less knowledge battling against Force adepts and lightsaber duelists than someone like Maul would routinely training with the Sith Masters, meaning the Master and Padawan duo would perform overall worse in this fight than one would expect. In spite of this ambush, it's still more than apparent that Qui-Gon is able to match and in some ways outshine Maul, forcing him to throw away his familiar combinations and strategies, yet still failing to gain any sort of upper hand, as Qui-Gon's ferocity matches his own. Much of the same is true in regards to their fateful battle later on Naboo, where Qui-Gon is once more stated to hold his own against Maul over the course of their duel, but begins to grow fatigued as he's been forced to carry much of the fight on his own and has less energy as an older man in comparison to the younger Obi-Wan, alongside the fact his form for Ataru can indeed be quite taxing on stamina. This of course prompts his death, but what we can take away from these two separate encounters is that the Sith Lord and Jedi Master are much closer than one would be led to believe. In fact, I'd go as far as to say Maul's victory isn't all it's cracked up to be when considering Qui-Gon's stamina issues, in addition to the fact it's actually been stated that Maul used his dark side power in order to nerf Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's abilities in the Force. Qui-Gon's consistent handicaps where he's caught off guard, growing fatigued, and having his Force powers reduced make this a less than decisive victory, and funnily enough, other excerpts imply that Obi-Wan is likewise a formidable opponent for Maul, despite not at all being an equal to his teacher, making for even worse Maul PR. Now would be a good time to discuss Maul's apprenticeship to Darth Sidious, as well as his place within the Sith Order in general. Some hold Maul in a higher stature than the Sith that came before him solely off the basis of the Rule of Two. For those unaware, the Rule of Two was a statute created to empower the Sith 1,000 years before the events of A New Hope, after the sheer lust for power that bred disunion among the Sith led to their near destruction at the hands of the Jedi amidst a conflict on Ruusan. As the sole Sith survivor of the war, Darth Bane would seek to rebirth their order with the Rule of Two, a resolution that ensured the Sith would grow stronger by harnessing the dark side energy throughout the galaxy in just two individuals, a Sith Master who embodies power, followed by an apprentice who seeks and craves said power. Once the apprentice then grows to a level that rivals or exceeds his master, he overthrows him and takes the dark side power for himself. This results in the impression that, since Maul is now an apprentice to Sidious, he would then be stronger than Darth Plagueis Plagueis who came before his master in the Sith Order. This cannot be the case though when remembering that Maul never actually grew stronger than or overthrew Sidious in order to gain his strength through the rule of two. Their training sessions that predate the events of the Phantom Menace depict Maul on the back foot against his master, even while amped through harnessing the hatred and anger that fuels the strength of the Sith Lord. It could be said that Maul performs worse than he would have otherwise from being injured due to his training prior to facing Sidious, but Maul notes over the course of the Clone Wars that pain only in fact makes him stronger, in addition to declaring that the Sidious who trained him was the most powerful being he had ever seen. This, as we mentioned prior, would soundly place Maul below the likes of Plagueis as well, considering that the author of the Plagueis novel and other EU material, James Luceno, noted that if the two had come to blows, Plagueis would have likely found a way to undermine his apprentice, Sidious, in a duel. In addition to the fact that Sidious perceives he and his master as comparing to the strongest of the Jedi at the time, which would at the very least include the Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, who already compared to Maul quite handily. This means that Maul then promptly leaves the story of the films after being thrown away like trash, while only ever being given to the Sith in the first place solely for the purpose of servitude, with that life of slavery to hatred and anger never amounting to any of the power demonstrated by his masters and just narrowly rivaling his Jedi counterparts through a combination of their own specific shortcomings and dark side hindrances. This appears to be as far as this Phantom Menace Maul can go as well, with the prequel trilogy stunt coordinator Nick Gillard declaring that despite being far from his peak of power, Anakin as he appears in Attack of the Clones would soundly defeat Maul in a duel. The Legends Star Wars head-to-head book additionally pits this episode 1 Maul against the Nautolan Jedi Master Kit Fisto, who despite Maul's relentless and frantic attacks, maintains control in order to wear the Sith down as he had done with Qui-Gon before, claiming a firm victory. This is consistent when shortly after the events of episode 2, Obi-Wan and Kit Fisto duel in a sparring session that went on for hours, where in spite of Kit Fisto providing himself deliberate disadvantages and dueling in a manner he felt unorthodox, Obi-Wan immediately deduces Kit's abilities with the sword as being superior to his own and refers to his performance as brilliant. In spite of his injuries at the hands of Obi-Wan, Maul, like Darth Sion before him, would cling to life with the power of rage and suffering through his knowledge of the dark side. This brings about Maul in fact returning even stronger during the Clone Wars, with an apprentice of his own in his long-lost brother, Savage Opress. Maul's aspirations when conspiring with his brother to intervene in the Clone Wars is, to put it bluntly, revenge. Retaliation against Obi-Wan for his maiming all those years ago, as well as Sidious for how he was raised and used as a weapon, is all that occupied Maul's mind, with Night Sister magic and the dark side fueling his body, at least what's left of it. Maul's brother Savage would be dealt a killing blow at the hands of Sidious later in the season, but Clone Wars producer Dave Filoni has gone on record in the past stating that in truth, Maul performed better in their fight against Darth Sidious than the Jedi Council did in episode 3.
You know, getting taken out by Sidious is pretty good, ranks up there. He puts up a better fight, than the Jedi Council did, I'll say that much for him.
This likely doesn't include Mace for obvious reasons. However, the Council were not at their best when facing Sidious, explicitly stated to be nerfed by the application of a dark side confusion haze, paired with the fact Sidious was instead holding back on Maul, hoping to leave him alive to be some sort of use to he and Dooku, and drawing out his mother Talzin, with several statements declaring Maul to have been handled by the Sith Lord easily and totally untested. Now, I'm sure many of you didn't actually expect Maul to present any kind of threat to Sidious in the first place, but let's step down to see how Maul stacks up against his replacement, Count Dooku. As a Jedi who had fallen from the light, Dooku was the subject of various comparisons to his former contemporaries. Lucas has said in the past that Yoda and Dooku are equals during their duel on Geonosis.
Just go right into the sword fight. So I decided to go back to the Empire Strikes Back of throwing things at each other, even though I knew they were equal to each other, so it was a hopeless gesture and they would have figured that out in 2 seconds.
With many guides following declaring that among the Jedi, only the likes of Mace Windu and Grandmaster Yoda have any hope of besting him, or that Dooku would have been a master on par with Yoda had he not left the Order. Both Mace and Yoda, of course, standing towards the top of the Order as the strongest Jedi of the time, stronger than the Obi-Wan and, for some reason, Padawans that Maul routinely struggles with, even being declared as the only ones that could stand a chance against Sidious over the course of Revenge of the Sith. We do have direct comparisons between Dooku and Maul, Lucasfilm staff holding them both at 8s on a 1 through 9 scale, but clarifying that there's a major gap between those numbers in regards to how much they've learned. This adds up with other statements that acknowledge Maul's strength through sheer animalistic rage, yet still declare Dooku's measured and precise approach would triumph over such a foe. It seems Maul can't stand against the 2 reigning Sith Lords of the time, but surely he could best the one supplementing his place as their attack dog, right? Well, no. Grievous has been repeatedly hailed as basically the LeBron Jedi killer, being the greatest the galaxy has ever seen since the bounty hunter Dirge. This would likely include Maul, considering he served as Sith assassin for most of his life, and therefore putting Grievous above him. The cyborg general's accolades don't stop there either, with the Revenge of the Sith novelization depicting him as getting the upper hand on Obi-Wan several times over the course of their duel, and just before the events of Episode 3, Grievous manages to engage with Mace Windu in a pitched saber duel, all as a result of his training with Count Dooku, who admittedly has to go all out, giving his everything in order to best Grievous in their extended sparring sessions. Now to some, it may still be somewhat far-fetched to place Grievous side by side the coveted prequel trilogy top tiers, but time and time again it takes an opponent of this level to stand against him, making Grievous the most talented non-Force adept duelist of all time, and perhaps the most skilled Jedi killer ever seen, save for Darth Vader. All this aside, there is still the bantha in the room, and that's the fact that Grievous undeniably performs better against Obi-Wan than Maul did. Although Kenobi was certainly pressed the entire time against the sibling duo of Maul and Savage, he still managed to come out on top, bravely injuring the latter and the first opting to retreat, soundly and firmly denying him his revenge. It would appear that with Maul's return, he not only barely demonstrated any substantial growth as a duelist or in force power, but he didn't actually achieve much of anything at all. At best, he managed to kill Obi-Wan's love interest Satine, which, while undoubtedly tragic, isn't really the same as facing the Jedi Master on his own and emerging victorious, rather than slaying non-combatant loved ones. Sidious likewise slipped from Maul's so-called justice, meaning Maul never actually got revenge on any of his targets and led the rest of his family to their deaths in his meaningless quest to do so. If there was one word to encapsulate Maul's character and his legacy, it would certainly have to be failure. A perpetual loser who never gained any worthwhile victories and never managed to be a captivating character in any sense, being constantly led around and manipulated by those higher up on the pecking order. Many of Maul's fans look forward to watching the story of a fallen Sith apprentice on the run from the Empire unfold in Maul's Shadow Lord. However, this has already been done with Starkiller before him in the classic Force Unleashed. Others do find Maul's story of being abused, tortured, and manipulated by Sidious into being his attack dog to be complex, but I would contest this once more by saying we've already received this structure of character in Darth Vader, someone else who was beaten and broken down by Sidious during his time as his apprentice, as well as someone else who, ironically, has soundly beaten Maul before. And like Vader, Maul's story ends with being bested by Luke Skywalker, only he gets no happy ending and has his brain held in a back-to-tank by a mad scientist, promptly turned off with the push of a button. Standard Star Wars stuff. Regardless of anything I've said here, Darth Maul still undeniably has his fans, but I can still comfortably say I haven't the slightest idea as to why, since being a fan of Darth Maul is a lot like being a fan of your alcoholic uncle who's having a midlife crisis and bought a sports car he can't afford to feel better about himself after a less than amicable divorce and doesn't see his kids for months at a time. Anyway, thank you for watching another one of my videos, and if you have the time, be sure to check out the other Star Wars content on the channel, or really anything that may catch your eye, as it supports me when making more content in the future. Subscribe for free to be notified about what I get up to in the future, such as when I upload or stream. Like this video to support both the channel and myself, as well as let me know that this is the type of content you want to see. Comment down below if I missed anything or with any suggestions you might have for the future, and be sure to let me know what your personal thoughts are on Darth Maul. Thank you all for watching, and have a great rest of your day.